John Sweeney is a British investigative journalist and writer. He worked for the Observer newspaper and BBC's Panorama and Newsnight series. Sweeney ceased working for the BBC in October 2019 and now is reporting on the war in Ukraine, as well as creating a daily war diary, which I strongly advise you to watch if you've not yet seen it. He's also produced a film last year called The Eastern Front, which is an incredibly searing and brutal analysis of the war, which again, I strongly recommend you watch that. It's an incredibly powerful piece of journalism. Welcome to Silicon Curtain. Please like and subscribe to find more of our incredible speakers on the channel, and do please share links to the channel with your friends. It's especially important at this time to keep Ukraine top of the news. John, welcome back to the channel.
Sorry. It's now called Under Deadly Skies, and it came out this year.
It came out this year, didn't it? And I should know that because I went to see it in London.
Annoyingly, it's been rebranded Under Deadly Skies, or you can put a link to it at the end.
We'll definitely 100% put a link in there, because that was incredibly sort of powerful moment seeing that film, and of course, you know, it's representative of the pointy end. It's representative of that part of Ukraine which is taking the brunt of Russian aggression and, of course, war crimes, which you discuss very, very frankly there. Let's start with the film. What do you think the impact of that was, and what kind of feedback have you got from people who have seen it?
Well, what was incredibly moving was when we had a premiere in Kyiv, and one of my best Ukrainian friends, she said actually that was better than I thought it would be, and what happens?
Praise indeed, isn't it?
I mean, essentially, it's a road trip which we did last February, or this February, whatever it is, 7-8 months ago now, and we went with Kalen Robinson, who's a brilliant filmmaker. And he'd never been to a war zone before. And so part of the comedy of the film, and it's, you know, grimly serious in intent, but there are some comic moments which I think gives it a certain character, a certain thing about it, is every time there's artillery, Kenan jumps half a mile, and most of the time it's outgoing artillery. And bang! And I go, that's outgoing. And I said, like, there's a difference between outgoing and incoming. Outgoing is a bang, it's okay. Incoming is different. You can feel it through your boots. Bang, outgoing. And he checks me out with Paul Conroy, and Paul Conroy says, correct, absolutely correct. Paul Conroy's a great war photographer who was in Syria with Marie Colvin when she was killed by fire from Assad's killing machine. Paul was severely injured but survived. Bang! And it's a really big bang, and it's close. And Kanan says, that was incoming. And I said, you get used to it. So there's comedy, but we also, and this is very important, Jonathan, for people to understand the attitude of people here in Ukraine. We spoke to people who, when the Russians occupied the town of Kherson in the southwest, had been tortured. And there was one man in particular called Alexander who we filmed returning to the place where he was tortured. And he'd even put up a kind of a little calendar on the wall. So he could directly work out this was the very cell he was held in with his friends, and they had put electricity clips on him and tortured him through electricity and all sorts of other ways. And he was a big, strong man, not an important man, you know, a minor. I think he was a janitor in a block of flats, but a good bloke. And he was tortured in a kind of, for no purpose, you know, which country are you in, you know, like moronic adolescent questions. And this is a pattern, and I've interviewed other people who've been tortured elsewhere. And so the reason why the Ukrainians want the Russians out of all of Ukraine is that they know people who've been tortured, like Alexander, who's in our film. And my friend Vlad Demchenko, he's a soldier, he's fighting special forces right now. I haven't heard of from him in a month or so. How is he? I don't know. But he's fighting because 10 years ago he was in the Maidan, where they sought to overthrow the pro-Putin president. You get rid of him. They wanted Ukraine to be free, to be democratic, to join NATO, to join the EU, to have a free democratic life. And this is still their goal. But they also know, so, Vlad wrote I wrote a book last year called Killer in the Kremlin about Putin and the people he's had killed. And this year I helped Aidan Aslan write his book called Putin's Prisoner. And he also was a prisoner of Putin, and he was tortured. And this British, he was a British guy fighting with the Ukrainian Marines. He had a contract, he wasn't a mercenary. And the Russians and their proxies in the east of the country, Aidan's battalion run out of ammo. It was hit by a Russian bomber, and they had nothing left to fight, so they surrendered. And the moment the Russian proxies saw Aidan's passport, he was punched on the nose. Then he was taken to a place where he was tortured, beaten unconscious, stabbed, and his image was put up on Russian video. And luckily, Aidan had put up a video a couple of days before, just before he surrendered. And he looked scared, but his face is unscarred. When he's on again, his face, when he's on the Russian video, his face has been smashed up. His arm is really huge because it's broken or badly hurt. You can't see the wound, the stab wound in his back, but it's seeping. So these people know what it's like to live under Russian occupation. My friend Vlad Demchenko, who's attended a talk given by a therapist who treats Ukrainian prisoners of war who's been castrated by the Russians. And this isn't very common, but it's happened. There are multiple stories of women who've been raped by the Russian forces. And I've met a Swedish guy who works for an NGO who works with Ukrainian families whose children have been raped by Russian soldiers. So you get the drift here, yeah? The reason why Ukrainians do not want to surrender an inch of Ukraine is because the Russian army behaves monstrously. And everyone knows that. So politically, there is no appetite whatsoever for a deal with Ukraine because it would lead to castration and rape and torture of the people they're abandoning. And I do feel that people in the West don't get that. So what's happening now, as you know, is that there is gloom here because, and you know, I've been here pretty much for the whole war. I had every now and then I've gone back to London for some R&R, but essentially I've been here from the start of the big war. And to be in Kyiv when the Russian army was 12 miles away was frightening, but it was also incredibly exciting because of the spirit. No, we're going to fight. And they were serious and they were brave and they were good. And the electricity of that time was just extraordinary. And since then, an awful lot of young Ukrainian, mainly men, obviously some women, have been killed or maimed. Their lives changed irreparably because they have fought like tigers. But they haven't fought with the right amount of materiel. So the deal is simple, is because Russia has got nukes, the Western strategy is we must not put boots on the ground because that could provoke a third world war. But what we will do is we're not going to fight with Ukraine, but we will arm Ukraine. And the problem is, I think, that the true version of Western strategy is a long sentence, and we only articulate the first quarter of it. And the first quarter of the sentence is, we will defend Ukraine's right to exist, semicolon. But we will not give Ukraine enough arms to secure victory against the Russians and throw Russia out of Ukraine for fear of that toppling Vladimir Putin, because we fear chaos in Russia without Putin. And it is the second part of this strategy, which is now causing real gloom here in Ukraine.
And of course, those who perhaps are in the unfortunate position of being able to see Russian propaganda in the original and watch an inordinate amount of it, which I'm afraid I already do, you will see that actually these narratives aren't just ones that we have come to ourselves. You see them propagated and amplified in Russian propaganda. They want us to believe that the next bloke after Putin is going to be worse, which from the Kremlin perspective is a ridiculous statement. But of course, no one who articulates these ideas thinks of articulating them through a Ukrainian voice or framework. They threaten nuclear war. They threaten all these things. Most commentators who have analyzed Russia in detail say that all these things are bluffs. These are all strategies to force us to limit our support and believe, one, that Russia is eternal and undefeatable, and second, that it's not in our interests to eject Russia fully, because that will stimulate real change in Russia and potentially the fall of Putin's regime. But the question here is, how can there be peace in Ukraine if Putin is still on the throne in the Kremlin?
I don't think there can be. And it's not just a question of peace. I'm very much, I've fallen in love with Ukraine. I think what they're doing here is that they are reminding us of something we in the West have forgotten, that democracy must be defended, that free speech does not come free. But they are actually fighting our war for us, because this isn't just about the sovereign integrity of Ukraine, it's also about us, because Russia and China and Iran and North Korea and their proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, etc., they are effectively fighting together, and they are coming for us. And so, I did Russian at school, and I'm, я глупый гном. I speak it terribly badly. I can read. I've just said, by the way, to non-Russian speakers, I'm a stupid dwarf. Also, извини, я говорю по-русски, как испанская корова. I speak Russian like a Spanish cow. So, and that's true. But I did politics and philosophy at university, and I went to LSE, and our teacher, the professor of Russian politics, he said, he was very old, and he said, I've forgotten his name, it's gone from my mind, never mind. And he said, as a small boy, I lived through both Russian revolutions, the February and the October. The February one was exciting, but by the time the second one came along, we just carried on playing cowboys and Indians because it was more fun. But that was a dry, Leonard Shapiro was his name.
Oh, he's extremely well known. Yeah, fantastic historian.
But he was not only a fantastic historian, but he was kind of living history. So, I was taught by somebody who, as a small boy, lived through both Russian revolutions. But
my professor on that one, you'll like this one. My professor at university met Kinsky, who went to the US and became an academic. And he said, you'll never meet a more twisted and traumatized and bitter individual as him, because for a short time, the entire fate of not just Russia, but the world, was in his hands. And he basically fluffed it.
Yes, it is a tragedy what happened then. But this is an avoidable tragedy. if you combine Western economic power, America, Europe, Britain, we are 25 times richer, stronger than Russia. So that so long as we are together, we can easily out-manufacture the Russians. But at the moment, the North Koreans are supplying more artillery shells to Russia than Europe is. At the moment, the entire American governmental machinery is frozen because a small clique of pro-Russian, pro-Trump lunatics have got a lock on the Republican Party machinery in the House of Representatives, and they're stopping aid going to Ukraine. At the same time, this awful war between Israel and Hamas in Israel-Palestine is a terrible thing, and it's a terrible distraction. But for fear of a wider war, which I don't think is going to happen, by the way, but for fear of a wider war between Israel and Iran, the Americans are rerouting artillery shells, which were heading to here, to Ukraine, and they're going back to Israel or the Middle East. So that, and this is a serious problem, because there isn't enough artillery shells for Ukraine at the moment. And people, I mean, last night in the Buena Vista, I was talking to someone who's got a good sense of what's going on. He's worried about, there's been a series of raids in Chernihiv, which is a city to the northeast of Kyiv. And what they're doing, the Russians are sending special forces over, and they're killing the border guards, like once a week, something like this. A couple of the time the other day, there was almost, the guy telling me the story was like a massacre, 20, 30 Ukrainians. Now, is this actually a new front, or is this a kind of mosquito-style wearing down of attacks, so the Ukrainians have to move more soldiers up to the northeast so that their big drive down in the south towards Tokmat is weakened? We don't know, but you hear more and more of these stories, so the Ukrainians are more and more stretched. So there's also a problem about articulating this stuff, because you're quite right. Everything that people like me say from here is critically analyzed by the by the Russian lie factory. And the Russians will pump, if you're saying things are gloomy here, the Russians will pump that out. And I notice it on Twitter. But at the same time, if not enough effective military aid is being given to Ukraine, the Western public needs to know that. Because, by the way, there's no doubt. I mean, I've actually been to all the countries in the axis of evil. I've been to Russia, China. I've actually been to Gaza twice, been to Iran, and of course, I've been to North Korea. And let me tell you, life is more fun in Kyiv, London, Washington, Paris, Berlin, than those places, no question. And I'd like to say to the useful idiots of the Kremlin, people like Peter Hitchens, go to Moscow. Actually, come here, come to Kyiv, and listen to people argue. Listen to people tell you funny stories about Zelensky, critical, not, oh, he's our great hero. He is a hero to people here because he's been the voice of Ukraine at a critical moment. But there are people who will openly criticize him about some of his policies, about his efficiency, about his effectiveness, the people around him. You go to Moscow and they won't talk to you. You go to Moscow, you're somebody like me, you get arrested, you get detained. You go to China, no one will talk to you. You go to North Korea, the entire thing, there are no conversations. There are no private conversations of any kind whatsoever. So our system is better. And we must get ourselves, our great, powerful democracies, we've got to fix this. We've got to support Ukraine, because if we don't, fear of a bad tomorrow is becoming greater than fear of a worse today. Because Ukrainian defeat or some kind of stalemate that leads to a stalemate is a kind of Russian victory, because Russia still has something like a fifth of Ukraine's territory. And that's a lot of human beings there who face evil, who will live in a joke state, you know, the Donetsk People's Republic, the Lugansk People's Republic, the other bits and pieces, where torture and rape and castration, with the threat of your children being abducted. These are real things that are happening to people. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian kids have been stolen from their Ukrainian families and then taken to Russia. And what's going to happen to those kids there? So these are the hard facts. The Westerners, and there are some of them are powerful in the White House, in Berlin, in Westminster, who are saying, okay, enough's enough, do a deal with the Russians. It's a deal that means people will be raped, people will be castrated, and kids will be stolen. What kind of deal is that?
Also, it's a bridgehead. I mean, this is the other aspect that seems not to be comprehended, despite there being ample evidence for it. In fact, the entire construct of the Soviet Union was to brainwash and weaponize the populations of occupied territories to turn them against the next territory. That's the entire Warsaw Pact. But it's been done in Chechnya, where you erase a nation's identity, raze its cities to the ground, and then over a generation, turn its population into an army, which you can then fling at the next territory in your long-term ambition. Now, this may seem fantastical to some people, but this is exactly what the Russians have done in Crimea. This is exactly what they're doing with the population in Donbass. So, John, how do we get this message across? Because it's not just that the civilians are living in a lawless territory, it's that their children will be brainwashed into becoming military zombies or cannon fodder and used as a bridgehead for the next invasion of Ukraine, whether that be 3, 5, 10 years' time.
Yes, that's what everybody thinks here, by the way. So let's punch that home, that if there is some kind of deal, then the Russians will come back. But in the meantime, by the way, I don't know how. It's very, very difficult. How do you unpick? How do you somehow defang the power of a fascist state to brainwash its own people if you can't get to them? It's very, very difficult. Indeed.
You actually cannot. There's no physical way. You might convince 5% of the population or so to flee, but the rest are.
So that you can. So part of my fascination with some men play golf, some men spot trains. I annoy the Church of Scientology. But part of my fascination with doing that is because I'm trying to unbrainwash people who are brainwashed. I think it's a brainwashing cult. They think I'm a bigot, a liar, and psychotic, all concerned, deny any wrongdoing. But there were, for example, when I lost my temper with the Church of Scientology, there were people who were inside the Church of Scientology then who were shown it as proof that their critics were demons, that I was some kind of demon. And there were people who've subsequently left, thought, no, even though I was brainwashed inside the Church of Scientology, I could see that you'd been manipulated to lose your temper. I could see there was something wrong about that. So even though you're brainwashed in a brainwashing state, there are moments where people can realize there is another story. And so it's continuing, it's worth doing, it's very much. But there's another thing that's going on as well. And Lenin and Stalin and Brezhnev never got close. The Soviet Union never got close at doing this. So what they did was Stalin got the American nuclear spies to spy for the Soviet Union. He got Kim Philby and his wretched crew, the Cambridge spies, to spy for the Soviet Union, a dictatorship, more fascist in my view than communist, but never mind that. And they, Philby penetrated the whole of British, MI6. But Putin has done far better. Britain is impoverished. We're losing, 5% of our GDP a year or something like this because of Brexit. I believe that dark Russian money and dark Russian activity, political action, helped push the numbers. I can't prove that, and all concerned deny any wrongdoing, but I think that happened. And there's no doubt in my mind whatsoever that the Russian secret state pushed Trump to become the president in 2016. And so Putin is, if we give Putin a deal, the idea he's going to say, oh, that's nice, I'll just sit and rest, I'll have a break now. No, he's going to continue to use the machinery of the dark Russian state to undermine our democracies, to find his creatures inside our politics and our societies and our cities to work for them. People like Tommy Robinson, who's been to Russia, who said, oh, I'd love to have a pint with Vladimir Putin. People like Donald Trump. I've got to be careful because I saw what's happened to Carol Cadwallader, but Aaron Banks has got a Russian wife. I used to say to Aaron, well, Aaron he met him and his gang. They met the Russian ambassador and his team on several occasions. The men with snow on their boots, all concerned deny any wrongdoing. But my anxiety about the Western policy, which says, let's push Ukraine to do a deal, is that will be unbelievably cruel thing to ask the Ukrainians to do, given what we know about Russian barbarity. But it's stupid for us too, because it means that Putin is going to come and get us next. He's getting us now. We are in a war with Russia, and we don't know that. And how well are we doing in this war? We don't know. We're fighting badly. But what's happening is that Putin is weaponizing people, frankly, who are traitors. And people like Trump is a traitor to American democracy, and he is more or less fascist in his announcements. And Putin is desperate for him to succeed. So the great generals that Putin can rely upon are Generals boredom and general fatigue and general whataboutery. And they're doing rather well for him. By the way, none of those three will, their helicopters will fall out of the sky. One of those three, will drink the wrong kind of tea. So Putin's putting a lot of money on this stuff. And I feel that, I do not think, by the way, that Western strategy is finished on this. It is concluded, this is what we do. But it feels like this is where it's ending up for a series of reasons. And we've got to change that. We have to spend more money on defense, every country in Europe and the United States, and we have to be more effective about what we send here. And it needs to, when we say we're sending this stuff, we need to send it. By the way, what this means is we've got to start building ammunition factories in Britain again. Now, that sounds crazy, and we don't have the money because of Brexit, but we have to do this because I can see this war with Russia continuing, and also behind Russia stands China. And I read a recent piece in the New Yorker about how Xi has almost become, China's much richer and much stronger than Russia, but Xi has somehow been captured by Putin's mind games, and that Xi is doing what Putin did. He's locking up the Chinese oligarchs. People like Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the Chinese versions of these are being locked up. All of them, bang, 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 bang. All the ones who've got a mind of their own, they've been locked up. And what this means is that Xi is taking Russia down this path. And and this is blunting the power of the Chinese economy to reinvent itself, to do exciting things. And so when you look at that, the final line of this New Yorker piece asks, is a stagnating China more or less likely to go to war with the United States? And the unescapable answer for me was more likely. So we need to build, I mean, we need to, I think that the factory that made Challenger 2 tanks is now a housing estate, complete with Ford Mondeos. I'm afraid to say we've got to start building factories for tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, because we're in trouble. So the primary problem with appeasing Vladimir Putin is we were making it more likely than not that my children or my grandchildren will end up fighting Russia and then China.
That's uncanny, John, because I was saying this to some Ukrainians who I was speaking to yesterday, and we'll come on to we won't name the individuals in the event, but it was an interesting insight. But they were listing, as Ukrainians do when they get together, they were listing their relatives and friends who'd either been killed, tortured, or unaccounted for, or who are on the front, and then they'll share the details. And all they'll need to do is to share a name, and instantly the other Ukrainian interlocutor will know. They'll make a face. They'll know how bad it is, depending on where on the front they're posted. But the list is horrific for those who, and of course, the First World War is a long time away in history for us. But every family will have one or more relative killed in the First World War. This is what Ukrainians are experiencing. Every single one of them will have their closest friends who've been killed, their colleagues from work, people they went to college with, relatives, family, all of them. And they'll be thinking exactly what you said, is if we don't finish this now, my children will be going here. And I said to them, one of the reasons I'm doing the channel is so that my little 10-year-old boy doesn't get conscripted in whatever, 12 years' time or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah. Both my grandfathers, I didn't know them, but they both fought in the First World War. My father was a ship's engineer in the Battle Atlantic, and I haven't fought in a war. And that isn't that lovely? So both my grandfathers were gassed, and they were also in dugouts. And when it was hit by the Kaiser's artillery, they were effectively buried alive, and their friends managed to dig them out. I think both of them were gassed twice and buried alive twice, and being buried alive was worse than being gassed. Now, I've never had to make that judgment, because I haven't had to fight in a war for Britain or any war. That is good. But if we don't spend enough money on defense and we don't effectively help our Ukrainian friends, then a future war for us becomes more likely, not less likely. By the way, talking about effective, the other day, David Cameron, Lord Cameron of Snooty, as he now is, came to Kyiv, and lots of hugs and no money and no tanks. So let's just give one simple number. The Ukrainians have destroyed 2,000 Russian tanks. The Russians have got something like 8,000 tanks left. Britain has given Ukraine 14 Challenger tanks. We have another 200 in storage, which are slowly rotting, and a couple they use for show. The Europeans, principally the Germans, have given 60 big main battle tanks. These are the Leopards, to the Ukrainians. So that is 74 main battle tanks. The American Abrams tanks haven't arrived yet. So the Russians have got 8,000 tanks left, and we, the West, have given 74 main battle tanks. Hello? So what the problem I'm seeing here is that there are far too many. By the way, the Secretary of State for Defense for America, the head of the Pentagon, Austin, he comes to Kyiv and he announces $100 million. Ukrainians need billions. They need billions. And there was a package of some like $8 billion, which is the moment frozen because it's not moving anywhere, because the MAGA extremists have frozen the decision-making in the House of Representatives. So what you're getting is a kind of pantomime, because it's that time of year, a pantomime reality of aid to Ukraine without the fact, without the real thing. And what matters in politics is not what you say, but what you do, that your words have effect. And at the moment, now, where this all will come unstuck is if, for example, and God forbid, I don't want this to happen, but if the Russians go on the move and they get back a big city, say Kharkiv, which was a city of 1 million people, this is not impossible if we carry on not helping Ukraine effectively. Then suddenly we will see a whole new burst of Ukrainian refugees. And then you've got to say to the people who've let Ukraine down, well done, congratulations. Where are you going to put these people? Who's going to pay for them to live in the West? Should they be on benefit, or should we let them starve? Or is it better that they live in their own homes in safety, because we have the money and we have the resources to do that? At the moment, we don't have the political will. So there is and this is why, and I know it sounds depressing, Jonathan, and when I go back to London, let's go for a drink and drown our collective sorrows. But this is why it feels like we're living inside a replay of 1938. And we all know how that ended up.
And the cost only rises. This is something that Ben Hodges and Richard Sheriff made very clear on the channel recently. The cost of fighting tyranny only rises. And yet it seems to me, and for all those Democrats who are sort of smugly saying, well, it's all the MAGA Republicans' fault, there's a problem on the other side of the aisle, I believe. And that is, there is a contingent, and I think we were talking before we hit record, that actually this debate isn't final, but there is a contingent. Often they are, global foreign policy experts. There are some lawyers, people who've heard this channel will know who I'm referring to here, in the administration, who fervently believe that ultimately this war cannot be fully won by Ukraine ejecting Russia from its territory. It will inevitably result in a negotiation. And there may be the thinking here that there may be some incremental gains that will improve Ukraine's negotiating position. But if ultimately it all ends in a negotiation, then why would you supply Ukraine with the additional material to carry on fighting? It seems that there are these arguments happening, and that school, I call it the defeatist appeasement school, or shoot yourself in the foot school, seems to be gaining the upper hand. What's your impression of the two sides of this debate? And let's call out Democrats who are maybe hooked on this illusory idea that you can negotiate with Putin.
Well, there's a problem in that there are people close to Joe Biden who think this. Now, Joe Biden's motivation is, it makes me think about appeasement harder. Neville Chamberlain did not want to fight a second world war. And he was so afraid of not wanting to fight a second world war that he ended up creating the conditions for a second world war, because we let the dictator get away with it. We didn't stand up. So there are three great missed opportunities. For example, if you're British, when the Russian dark state used a weapon of mass destruction to poison Litvinenko, and God knows how many other Londoners with polonium-210, we should have read the Riot Act seriously. Instead, we expelled 4 diplomats. Hello. Then in 2014, the Russian Bug missile shot down MH17. 10 Britons were on that plane. 298 people were killed out of the sky, but 10 Britons. It's a very serious terrorist attack by the Russian state. And again, we our messaging was weak. 2018, guess what? More poison. This time with a different kind of weapon of mass destruction, but a weapon of mass destruction, Novichok, used against a British citizen. And it didn't kill the intended target, but it killed a perfectly decent Wiltshire lass, Dawn Sturgis. So these are the lines in the sand that we kept on. This is a line of the sand. This is a red line. Oh, walk across it. Okay. Oh, you've walked across it. Oh dear. Okay, we'll go backwards. Don't do this, because we're not going to be strong enough. Because dictators like Putin smell our fear. But there are people, so I think there's continuing arguments. What one hears is, for example, Blinken is on the side of really standing by Ukraine, but Jake Sullivan, the American National Security Advisor, is on the side of appeasement. I'm using that language because I understand.
He's a lawyer, by the way, just saying.
Shoot all the lawyers. I don't think so, because I believe in the rule of law. And I would commend to you Sir Thomas More's great speech in Robert Bolt's A Man for All Seasons, where he goes at Richard Richford saying, destroy the law. And he says, the liberties of England are defended by this forest of laws. And what would you do? You'd knock them all down. What happens if a devil came for you then? How would you defend yourself? So I'm in favor of the rule of law, but not necessarily lawyers.
And perhaps not giving them the power to decide strategy. Lawyers very good at interpreting and enforcing law, not maybe at strategic thinking.
Well, so there is a anyway. I think there's a continuing argument inside the Western powerhouses. I worry about Rishi Sunak. I don't think I dislike Boris Johnson intensely, but at some animal level, he got it, that it was important to stand by Ukraine, having shilly-shallied and dilly-dallied for a long, long time. Certainly as foreign secretary, he was no effective friend for Ukraine. But when the big war starts, he gets it, and we do stuff. But when Cameron came here, we've got no announcement of British aid. And there's no prospect of it because Britain is broke. We've impoverished ourselves because of Brexit. So we're out of the game. So what's happened is Russia has again used its dark power to affect a weakening of Britain as an effective player. We're not really in the game of defending Ukraine effectively as far as the future is concerned because we don't have any money. Why? Because of Brexit. Who thought that Brexit was a bloody good idea? The Kremlin. By the way, what's happening in Africa is deeply distressing. So essentially, there's been a series of coups throughout the Sahel, which you can go now from the whole of the Atlantic Ocean all the way over to the Gulf. All of these countries are now pro-Kremlin, with the new morphed version of the Wagner army helping the dictators secure, helping them to torture, helping them to murder their opponents. And they're running adverts saying, how good French social security is. They are pushing Africans north. And it's a replay of what happened in 2016. Putin supports the tyrant Assad. Assad is such a horrible person. Young men don't want to fight for him. They flee the country because fleeing the country is less of a risk than staying to fight for Assad. And then this generates terrible social tension in Europe. Every likelihood of this happening again. If we do a deal with Putin, he's not going to sit still. He's going to carry on attacking us, undermining us, corroding the rule of law, corroding our institutions. And so, I mean, you know, the big picture is, yes, we must defend Ukraine, but by defending Ukraine and arming Ukraine properly, we're also fighting for ourselves and our liberties and our democracies and our way of life. And we cannot assume in this silly way that we're doing at the moment, some people think that just because 1989 happened, that everything's going to stay like that. No, 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 no. Our side is in trouble. Our side is on the back foot. The people who are feeling it the worst are the Ukrainians, because they're right at the front line. They're at the pointy end. But just because London is further west, it doesn't mean the Russians are coming. They're not coming for us. Oh, yes, they bloody are.
And the last question here, and I think it's very apposite. This is the 10th anniversary of Maidan. And I think something that is also underappreciated is that Ukraine is still a revolutionary society. Many of those who are fighting, many of those who are working in the media or as academics or on Ukrainian culture, they are still fired up by the fervor of the revolution, by the values of the revolution. And as you said earlier, that very keen sense of what unfreedom versus freedom actually means in your daily life and your identity and the rule of law, and the ability to fight corruption and evolve your culture and country. None of these things, of course, will be possible under Russian occupation. But it seems to me you do not appreciate either the importance of Maidan or the fact that Ukraine is defending something not only that is valuable for itself, but something that we can learn for. It seems that we, as you say, have lost the sense of the value of freedom because we haven't had to defend it for a generation, defend it with lives and blood. Do you think our political class in some way are slightly fearful of Ukraine? Because Ukrainians talk truth to power. Ukrainians call out the bullshit. Ukrainians are full of fervor and energy to reform and change. That must make a lot of establishment figures quite uncomfortable, in fact.
Yes, I feel that, well, what's going to happen is that soon, this winter, the failure to deliver effective military aid in a timely fashion is going to have consequences for life and people here. So what everybody is worried about is that there will be a new Russian rocket and drone attacks on the power stations. And I mean, I was having a drink with a Ukrainian friend, and she bought a generator, and I thought, is that for you? No, no, no. It's actually for some friends in the army. But it's like she actually showed me a picture of a generator on the phone, and it was like generator porn because if you've got a generator, you're going to be okay, you know. And so there is. I mean, there are people in London or in Britain or in America who are doing that. But then they're not at the sharp end. They don't understand. So there is a real thing is that I think people here kind of live in truth. They understand what it's like. They're fighting, or they know people fight. I mean, I know I've got there's a friend of mine in one of the bars, you know, her bloke's in Backma. You know, he's hi, how's it going? Good, you okay? Yes. How's your guy? He's still alive. And by the way, this means something. You wouldn't go into a pub in London or Liverpool or Sheffield or Glasgow and say, or Cardiff or Belfast, let's get it all out there. You know, how's your, to a barmaid, how's your bloke? Oh, they're still alive. So there is something true about what Ukrainians are going through, that this agony is not a drama, it is real life. And it reminds me of what I read about Britain in 1940. And it's why I like being here, because Kyiv, it feels to me, is the capital of the free world. And yes, I feel that our politicians are failing us. And they are telling they're beginning to tell something that's that what they've been doing is beginning to, as things get worse here, it's beginning to be revealed that what they've been saying is more lie than truth. We are helping Ukraine, okay, but enough? No. And what's that mean? Is 14 Challenger tanks enough to change the game here? So the effective, what matters in politics is not what is said, but what is done. And the effect of our poor delivery, of our lack of commitment, our lack of money, our lack of serious, effective aid is about to be seen. What we've done is we've given the Ukrainians enough to defend themselves, but not enough for victory. This means agony for the Ukrainians, but it also means that Vladimir Putin lives to survive another day. And you know what he's going to do with that borrowed time we've just given him? He's going to try and fuck us. We've got to stop him before he causes more damage. More damage in Africa, more damage in the Middle East, more damage in Europe, more damage in Britain. We've got to stop him. Full stop.
That's a very powerful place to end it. And if people are interested in that story around Sahel, there's a fantastic interview on the channel with Beverly Ochieng, who goes into the extraordinary detail of how Wagner and Russia have engineered at least 8 out, I think, of the 10 coups that have happened in the last 10 years. And why are they doing it? Is it simply to exert power? No, they have access to huge resources. Gold, diamonds, other resources in these countries, as well as contracts from the newly minted dictators of those countries, lucrative contracts for mercenary troops. So it's a huge mafia money-making machine, and it's one that can corrupt us from the inside and out if we let it. John, what you do is incredibly inspiring. It feels that this is coming to a point where these words of people on the ground like you are more and more and more important, but less and less and less heard in the mainstream media. So thank you so much for talking to us, and thank you for everything that you're doing.
Cheers, old boy. If you see, I had my nails to cheer myself up. I had my nails done. I've also, I've had my nails done once before, but I've also, at this time, I haven't got my toenails done. Something there's a danger, and every now and then to show off, I actually take my my boots and socks off to show, and it's snowing, it's -5 out there. And so if I've got it, so I'm worried I'm going to end up with frostbite.
And when they treat you, out come the nails.
Well, so yes, but it's kind of, but we've got to, I mean, Britain did this in 1940, we fought the monster and we had a laugh. And that's also true here. Don't misunderstand my gloom about the failure of Western delivery. Is not the same as the Ukrainians are defeated. They're not. They're fighting like tigers, but they need more bullets. They need more ammo. But they're heroes, and it's great to be here.
John, thanks so much. Good luck. Stay safe. And we'll see you, hopefully, in Kiev in a couple of months when I come over.